This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, Wall Street titan Jamie Dimon has told Congress his billion-dollar debacle is not really gambling. americasdemocrats.org tells you otherwise. Michael Greenberger, a former regulator with the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, says the high price of gasoline is a direct result of casino gambling by Wall Street oil speculators. As the presidential campaign gets heated up, so do the metaphors. Yale economics professor Robert Shiller explains why Republicans are using the wrong metaphors, such as belt-tightening. Instead, we need to spend more now so we can save more later. And Bill Press talks with Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards about Wall Street gamblers, the Republican crusade against the Attorney General, and the state of the economy. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Former Wall Street regulator Michael Greenberger says gasoline could be $2.50 a gallon if it weren't for outrageous and barely regulated casino gambling by oil speculators. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Michael Greenberger is the founder and director of the Center for Health and Homeland Security at the University of Maryland and a professor at the School of Law. Previously, Professor Greenberger served as Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General in the Clinton administration and Director of the Division of Trading and Markets at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Professor Greenberger, thanks for joining us today again on americasdemocrats.org.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, you and others make the case that the high price of gasoline has nothing to do with supply and demand. Can you explain what the cause really is then?
Well, I don't want to say it has nothing to do with supply and demand. Supply and demand is definitely a factor, but the argument that I and others make, in fact, including the President of the United States, President Obama, is that too much of the price is a result of unchecked speculation in the crude oil commodity markets. And it's very interesting because on April 17th, 2012, President Obama held a news conference in the Rose Garden where he vigorously attacked the speculators in the market, re-emphasized the fact that he had created an interagency task force led by the Department of Justice to investigate that manipulation. And ironically, that was the high point in the most recent run-up in the price of crude. Ever since that day, crude has been tailing off, going down faster than it's gone up. And I think people are beginning to see that reflected in the price of gasoline. Price of gasoline has dropped pretty dramatically, and gas prices follow by several weeks the declining price of oil, and I think American consumers are going to be very pleasantly surprised this summer about the fact that gas will have gone back down. However, I think the president recognizes this as well. We have got to finally put a nail in the coffin to speculators who bet up the price of crude oil and therefore the price of gasoline for their own profit. None of that additional money that consumers pay goes into production of energy. It all is pocketed by big banks who are speculating on this price and offering other wealthy individuals a casino-like environment to make those bets. I think Congressman Markey has led the charge by introducing legislation just this week that he's been working on for several weeks, which would outright ban the betting on the price of the upward direction of crude oil. There's $500 million in the market just simply betting that the price of crude oil will go up. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the same time the president made his Rose Garden speech, the House Democratic leadership was holding a televised on C-SPAN hearing, which I had the pleasure of participating in, calling out these speculators. Congressman Markey, Congressman Frank, Congressman DeRosa, Congressman Van Hollen, all the Democratic leadership have put their wheel to the shoulder, have got this bill introduced, and I think it's a warning to the gamblers that they got to get out of the market.
But isn't speculation on future prices a fundamental part of all commodity markets?
It definitely is a fundamental part of commodity markets, but let me give you a statistic. First of all, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the first pieces of legislation he sent to the New Deal Congress was developed under the following thesis. Yes, you need speculation in commodity markets, but if you have too much speculation, the price of the commodity becomes unmoored from price-demand fundamentals because you have too many people in the market that are not looking for their economic self-interest. In a normal market, say with wheat, you've got the farmer trying to get the highest price opposed to the baker trying to get the lowest price, and that tension adheres the price to supply-demand fundamentals. You need speculators to provide liquidity for the farmer and baker, but when the speculators get too much a part of the market, they unmoor the market, and Roosevelt came up with the idea that we should be banning not speculation, but excessive speculation. That is, more speculation than is needed to provide liquidity to the commercial producers and consumers in the market. Mm-hmm. In a well-functioning market, when I was a regulator at the CFTC in the late 90s, the markets were usually 70% commercial, 30% speculative. Right now, the crude oil market is 80% speculative, 20% commercial. So, in a sense, what you have is a market that's gone away from price hedging to get the best prices, which end up being the best prices from the consumer, to being an unregulated gambling casino where wealthy investors, banks, private equity, hedge funds are simply betting on the upward direction of the price of crude oil. And that's what's caused the problem. The president realizes this. The House Democratic leadership has realized this. The progressive senators in the Senate, Maria Cantwell, Senator Levin, Senator Sanders, Senator Bill Nelson from Florida, to name just a few, have been very, very diligent on this issue.
Now, you've testified that Congress should vastly expand the resources available to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, which apparently doesn't have enough money or people to regulate speculation. How likely is that to happen?
Well, the Republicans, by controlling the House and de facto making dysfunctional the Senate through the filibuster, they have a strategy of stopping regulation by starving out the regulators. The CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, is the key regulator in this area, by the way, led by Chairman Gary Gensler, who's been an outstanding appointment of the president. He's done a great job. But we're talking here about roughly a $40 trillion notional value market with about 700 employees overseeing it. The president has wanted to increase that number to about 1,200 employees. The Republicans would like to reduce it to about 500 employees. And because of the leverage they have by running the House and through the filibusters in the Senate, they've really starved out the CFTC. And also it's very ironic because there was a failure of a big future commission merchant, MF Global, and $1.6 billion of customer funds were stolen. The people who got hurt by that were small businesses, but especially farmers and ranchers. The Republicans represent that constituency substantially, and when you hear the Republicans talk about that, they blame the CFTC for not regulating adequately. Or when we had this recent J.P. Morgan fiasco where they lost $2 billion on this highly risky bets, the Republicans have the chutzpah to attack Gary Gensler and the CFTC for not doing enough. But when they get hold of the budgets of those agencies, with full knowledge that they're strangling regulations, they underfund those agencies. Again, the Democrats have fought very hard to support the president in giving these agencies what they want. These agencies are the cops on the beat that protect the American consumer. The Republicans want to get the cops off the beat. The Democrats want to get more cops on the beat.
We're speaking with Michael Greenberger, founder and director of the Center for Health and Homeland Security at the University of Maryland, also a professor at the School of Law. So in the meantime, Professor, what is the likely effect of this oil speculation on the economy as a whole?
Well, when the price was surging, it was having a drag on the economy. And while there are lots of threats to the economy as we speak, the European sovereign debt crisis being the principal drag, our state and local governments not having enough funds to hire people and laying people off is a big drag. But as the oil price reached its heights in April, it was the biggest threat to driving us back into a second recession because the economy just couldn't bear the price of $4 a gallon gasoline. And as I said earlier, I think the president deserves a lot of credit because he called this issue out in the April 17th Rose Garden presser, where he stood with the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Chairman of the CFTC. He called out the speculators and recommitted himself to the Justice Department investigating this for criminal manipulation. Ever since then, the price has gone down. All the experts say it will continue to go down. But the problem is what we've had in this over the last 2 or 3 years is a roller coaster ride with these prices. We've got to nail the speculators. We've got to stop the speculation. And as I said earlier, in the House side, with the leadership of Congressman Markey, Congressman Frank, Congressman DeRosa, Congressman Van Hollen, Congressman Larson, all leaders in the House Democratic leadership, legislation has been introduced that would knock out the speculative effect and would bring the prices more in line with supply demand. And if that were to happen, I think we could see $2.50 a gallon gasoline again.
Boy, wouldn't that be nice? So how does, or how ought to, the Dodd-Frank legislation affect oil speculation? I mean, if the law isn't working as intended, what's the reason and what's the solution?
Well, there's two things that Dodd-Frank did about this, and frankly, one of them was spearheaded by Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington, which is it made it easier for the CFTC to bring cases against speculative manipulation in these markets. The CFTC has started to bring these cases, and I think those actions have scared off the speculators from active participation in this market, and that too is one of the reasons we're starting to see a price decline. The other thing Dodd-Frank did was try and reinforce the idea of President Roosevelt that there should be limits to participation of speculators in these markets. Again, speculation that helps the consumers and the producers, the commercial interests, is thought to be, in effect, the good cholesterol in the system. Where you have too much speculation, it's like the bad cholesterol. It overwhelms the system, unmoors prices from supply-demand fundamentals. Dodd-Frank delegated to the CFTC to reimpose the kind of Rooseveltian position limits that would limit speculation. Unfortunately, one of the sad after chapters with regard to Dodd-Frank is that the banks overwhelmed the rulemaking process there, and it was very difficult for Chairman Gensler to get a third vote on the commission to impose strict position limits. He inherited one commissioner a Democratic commissioner who had been appointed by President Bush, and they could not get 3 solid Democratic votes out of 5 votes for tough position limits. That is why you are seeing now legislation like that proposed by Congressman Markey, which is gaining a lot of traction in the House, which is forget about delegating to the CFTC, just by statute, ban the gambling, the $500 billion in gambling that's going on into this market. And frankly, I think just the introduction of that bill, which was signaled for weeks now and actually introduced this week with a lot of support in the House, is another nail that was put in the coffin. It frightens away speculators. If the gambling's going to stop, they don't want to be left holding bets that will decline in value because there's no market for the betting. So people are getting out ahead of these kind of restrictions. So Dodd-Frank did a lot of good here. Some of that good got tied up by Wall Street lobbying in the rulemaking process. But I think both the president and the Democrats in Congress have been very vigilant in finding new ways to deal with this. And I think that's been a big cause of what we're seeing right now is the receding price of oil and the receding price of gasoline.
Okay, and we'll just keep hoping that it keeps going down. Professor Michael Greenberger, founder and director of the Center for Health and Homeland Security at the University of Maryland, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Professor, thanks so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Good.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, Yale economics professor Robert Shiller says economic belt-tightening doesn't work. In times like this, he says, increasing savings actually can hurt the entire economy. His solution? A little more government investment and a little more revenue. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
There must be some sort of greed gene that prompts compulsive outbreaks of financial graspiness by giant bankers. How else to explain the chronic gouges, excesses, and scandals that we're getting from this one small grouping of humans? Their latest reach is into the pockets of low and modest income college students who need federal student aid to help with today's ever-growing education costs. For decades, this financial assistance has come in the form of simple checks written to the students by the aid program or administered directly by the schools. But of course, this straightforward simplicity begged the obvious question. How can Wall Street grab a chunk of this student education money? I know, cried the greed gene from deep inside a particularly inventive banker. Debit cards. Rather than disbursing the aid by checks, get universities to let a bank issue debit cards for students to use to withdraw their aid funds electronically. What a nice service. But wait, these are bankers. They don't do nice, at least not for free. Sure enough, the campus debit cards, cheerily emblazoned with each school's logo, have hooked more than 9 million needy students to an insidious fee system, ranging from 50 cents per swipe to a $10 inactivity fee. Yes, a fee for not using the card frequently enough. Some 900 campuses have signed card deals with such outfits as Wells Fargo and Hire One. These high-flying financiers grin from ear to ear as they line their pockets with tens of millions of dollars a year that they siphon from the public fund meant to extend America's educational opportunities. This is Jim Hightower saying, for information, including action tips, get a new report called The Campus Debit Card Trap by the U.S. PIRG Education Fund. Go to uspirgedfund.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Robert Shiller is a Yale economics professor and New York Times columnist. He explains why Keynesian economics is still the prescription and why belt-tightening is the exact opposite of what the nation needs. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Robert Shiller is the Arthur M. Okun Professor of Economics at Yale University, who has written on financial markets, financial innovation, behavioral economics, macroeconomics, real estate, statistical methods, and on public attitudes, opinions, and moral judgments regarding markets. He is also a columnist for the New York Times and the author of Finance and the Good Society. Professor Shiller, thank you as always for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
My pleasure, Jim.
Well, you said recently that we rely too much on metaphors, wrong metaphors, to think about the economic crisis. Specifically, you mentioned the metaphor of belt tightening. What's wrong with that idea, and is there a better metaphor or shorthand that should be applied?
Yeah, a lot of our thinking about economics comes as an extrapolation from household economics. And the idea that in bad times we have to tighten our belts. That means cut out the luxuries, postpone things that can be postponed, like fixing the roof. Maybe you can get by without fixing it now because you're out of money and you're in trouble and you might go bankrupt. So that lesson has been really impressed on us very strongly. But the problem is it doesn't work for the country as a whole. There's something called the paradox of thrift that John Maynard Keynes referred to long ago. That is that if everyone does belt tightening at once, they won't even succeed in increasing their saving because their income, the national income, will decline. This is the basic wisdom of Keynesian economics. It's like 70 years old, and yet, still, many people haven't gotten it.
Now, I've heard it said that the only people who benefit from belt tightening are people with belts. Is that valid?
That's a good thing. Well, we're not that poor anymore. I think just about, your metaphor reminds me of those old pictures of someone wearing a barrel. Remember those?
Oh, yeah, right.
Those go back a long time. We now have much testimony to our economic success that we now all have belts and we all have almost all of us. But this does remind me, by the way, of economic inequality, which is a worsening problem in this country, and it's not talked about very much. But underlying these problems is a more unequal society, and that's uncomfortable for me. And that's why I think it was a good thing that Obama proposed raising taxes on the rich. I don't think that's class warfare. I think it's sensible, and it's where we need to go.
It seems, in my personal opinion, it's more class warfare if you don't.
Well, it looks like warfare. What some Republicans are saying. Because at a time when the top 1% of the population is rapidly growing in wealth, to propose, cutting taxes, it seems irresponsible. It seems to be maybe that is a kind of class warfare of the unfortunate variety.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as it damages the middle class, I don't know how, and the lower classes as well. I mean, I just don't understand how it can't be considered that. But that's, again, my opinion. How is a family budget different from a government budget, and why do so many people fail to understand the difference?
The family budget is exogenous. You either have a job or you don't. You're not going to affect your employment prospects by saving more. But for the nation as a whole, if we all save more, that means we're not spending. And so companies, they're not getting as much revenue. So they have to lay off workers. And then it makes it, these workers can no longer save. So maybe people don't make the connection. When one family decides on belt tightening, it doesn't matter. But if all the families in the country are going into belt tightening, the next thing that happens is you lose your job. That's the Keynesian paradox. And it's something that we understand, I think, well enough that we can take action against it. But that means raising taxes and raising government expenditure.
You know, more and more you read in the papers and you look online, and there are all these stories about how more and more companies, they're flush with money, but they're afraid to spend it right now. So it's more than just, okay, I'm not going to go to the movies twice this week, I'm only going to go once. I mean, it's you've got pretty large businesses that aren't spending the money that they may have 10 years ago. How big of a problem is that as far as the economic situation we're in right now?
Yeah, that's a big problem. We've seen declines in consumption, in corporate investment, as well as government expenditure. So we've got a triple whammy, and that's why the economy is so weak. But the same kinds of actions that would help restore consumer spending would restore corporate investment. Once they see that the economy is looking more sound, they'll invest more in plant and equipment, and construction activity will go up again. We are in the worst construction depression ever in this country, and it's because of this lack of confidence in our future. No one wants to build a new building and pay for it.
We're speaking with Robert Shiller, professor of economics at Yale University, columnist for the New York Times, author of the book Finance and the Good Society, here on americasdemocrats.org. Professor, explain, if you would, what economists mean when they talk about the paradox of thrift, and is there a solution to it?
Well, the paradox of thrift, it has a complicated history. It goes back to 1919, I think, when Keynes first wrote about it. But the idea is that things don't add up the way you might have thought. That the whole level of economic activity fluctuates in response to our moods. And when we get in a fearful mood, it drags down the whole economy. In fact, the world economy. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a very simple explanation of it in his inaugural speech in 1933. The only thing to fear is fear itself. The Great Depression in the 1930s, which had unemployment rates as high as 25%, was not caused by any recognizable exogenous or outside factor. What caused it? It was psychology. It was people's fears. When the stock market started to crash in 1929, they got scared and they sold, and it caused it to crash further. And then it caused people to lose confidence and they stopped spending. It had no sound reason. There was no reason to have the Great Depression, and there's no sound reason to have this continuing economic slump now. But we have to take collective action against it. We have to have a government that's willing to get expenditure going. And I would say raising taxes and raising expenditure on a temporary basis until this crisis is really over.
Progressives point to Keynesian economics, government spending to stimulate the economy, as a proven remedy for recession or depression. But you say that the philosophy cannot be proved to be correct. Why is that?
Well, we've learned, let's take an analogy to testing of pharmaceuticals. When they have a new drug, like take Prozac, for instance, they have to test it out on a lot of people. They've discovered that you can't rely on doctors' opinions or patients' opinions because there's a placebo effect, right? That they get overly optimistic about some drug. So what you have to do is do a randomized controlled experiment where you give half the people the drug and half the people a placebo. It's a double-blind experiment. Would be very careful that there are no biases. So if we wanted to use that kind of research on macroeconomics, we'd have to do a similar thing. We'd have to pick half the countries of the world would go on a stimulus and half of them would go on austerity. And we would have to flip a coin, make it purely random which one was which. Obviously, we can't do that. So we're just way behind the pharmaceutical companies in our ability to test. And you'll know from their experience that a lot of promising drugs turn out to be not as good as we thought. And that's the problem. We don't know whether things will really work according to our theory, and we can't do the experiments.
Now, you recently wrote that we ought to go back to an economic theory of the 1940s called the balanced budget theorem. Can you explain to our listeners what it means and whether balancing higher spending with higher taxes has actually worked?
Well, what happened in the Great Depression of the 1930s is that we couldn't get out of it. We were in the Depression for 10 years until World War II came. World War II was, in some sense, a reaction to the Great Depression. Starting in Europe, there was a depression in Europe. People elected, remember him, Adolf Hitler, in 1933, which is the worst part of the Depression. People get angry and insolent when there's a depression. And we couldn't get out of the Depression until the war started. And the war created the stimulus. So in 1942, William Salant, who was working at the Roosevelt White House, produced a paper. We didn't publish it for many more years, but he produced a paper. It was circulated among economists, saying that after World War II, the solution has to be, because we can't borrow more money after running up a debt of 150% of GDP. He said we have to do balanced budget stimulus. And Paul Samuelson, a young economist at MIT, took up the same theme and wrote about it. And it's become a textbook thing for the next 50 years. People learned about balanced budget multiplier in their classes. But it seems to have just faded away when we need it. It's never really been tried because after World War II, after the stimulus was withdrawn, we didn't go back into the Depression, and there was no need for a balanced budget stimulus. So I'm thinking we should try it now and get the economy back up, and then we can withdraw it, and there won't be need for it perpetually. That's a theory. It's maybe not proven, but I think we should try it.
Do we need more economists in Congress?
I wish we had more.
It doesn't. I mean, because we talk to a lot of economists on this program, like yourself, and there seems to be this theme, whether they are historically conservative economists or progressive economists, whichever the case, when we're talking about this current recession that a lot of people believe we're still in, and technically I know we're not, but I don't understand. I mean, I guess maybe it's just the political game, and that's all it's going to be, and I don't know how you bust that bubble, but there are a lot of things that make sense to us that we hear about on this program that are not being instituted by Congress right now, and if they at least tried it, perhaps we'd see some sort of breakthrough.
Well, we're going through a difficult period in U.S. history. It seems to me that there is less trust in our society's institutions than there was in the past. There's a sense that the media, among many people, not everyone, but among many people, there's a sense that the media are captured by certain interests, that they won't publish things like Obama wasn't born in America. They think that it's a conspiracy, and they're angry. I think the financial... By the way, I think Obama was born in America. I'm telling you what I'm hearing, which amazes me.
So you're going out on a limb and disagreeing with Donald Trump. All right.
That's right.
We have you on record.
Yes. So this is a troubling factor, which is not really an economic factor, but it is a loss of trust. And we really need to maintain our balance and our sense of authority and trust in people who do hard work to find out the facts, and we have to get back to that.
Okay. Robert Shiller is the Arthur M. Okun Professor of Economics at Yale University, columnist for the New York Times, author of the book Finance and the Good Society, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Professor, as always, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
My pleasure, Jim.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards about Wall Street, the economy, and Republican attacks on Eric Holder.
We've been talking about the love fest, if you agree, to Jamie Dimon, head of J.P. Morgan Chase in the United States Senate yesterday, especially from the Republicans senators there. Not the proudest moment, I don't think, on Capitol Hill. For a different perspective on that, we are joined in studio by a good friend of the program, one of the leading liberals and progressives in the United States Congress, Congresswoman Donna Edwards from the nearby state of Maryland. Hey, Congresswoman, nice to see you.
Hey, great to be here this morning.
Thanks for giving us some time this morning. Stopping by on your way to work. We like that. We try to make it as convenient as we can for you.
That's right. Great.
So what's going on with these Republicans slobbering all over it?
I think it's really clear the marriage between the Republicans and Wall Street is absolutely a perfect match made in heaven, because there's almost nothing that the financial sector can do that the Republicans will say, we need some rules, we need some transparency. And that was really clear in Dimon's testimony. Yeah.
I mean, here's the guy who's one of the leaders of Wall Street, who has been the chief opponent of any new regulations, the chief opponent of even implementing the provisions of Dodd-Frank, as weak as it is, right? And then he blows $2 billion in a
matter of a few weeks.
Right,
I mean, this is a really big deal.
Which proves they haven't learned anything.
They haven't, and not just that, but they're not interested in learning anything. The fact is, Republicans, one, they want to undo Dodd-Frank, and many of us wanted Dodd-Frank actually strengthened.
Of course.
Because we know that the financial sector needs oversight and needs regulation, because so much of our net worth hinges on that. And if you look at what has happened with Americans' net worth during the entire financial meltdown from 2007 until early 2009, I note that's before President Obama came in, that Americans lost almost 39% of our net worth. A lot of that was due to what happened in the craziness that went on in the housing market and the trading on securities and sort of betting against our interests. And Jamie Dimon came forward, no apologies, and said, you know what? This was just like a business deal.
Stuff happens,
and we're just going to go back to this, doing the same old thing, and we don't want you guys in our books.
Yeah. And I think that's proven. We saw yesterday the amount of money that Mitt Romney has raised from Wall Street, $37 million.
I thought it was a misprint when I read it. $37.1 million raised from the financial sector in Wall Street by Mitt Romney versus $4.8 million for President Obama. What we know is that Wall Street knows where their fortunes lie, and they lie with the Republicans, and that should be a red flag to voters in November, that if they want a sector that will continue to go unregulated and put us in jeopardy, vote for Mitt Romney. Otherwise, you've got to have President Obama in office.
Well, and what I wonder is, what has President Obama done that's so harmful to Wall Street? Those firms are back. The banks are back. Their salaries are back. Their bonuses are back. The market has doubled under President Obama. What's so bad about Obama for Wall Street?
Well, what's bad, the only thing that's bad from their perspective is that he wants to put down a few rules.
Right.
That ordinary class Americans don't have to bear the brunt of their mistakes. They juggle around $3 billion like it's chump change. And for the American people, that's really significant. And in the case of the financial disaster, we're talking a couple of $1 trillion. And so there's a real difference here between the direction and the vision that President Obama has to create jobs for ordinary working people, create wealth for ordinary working people, and to say to the top 1% and 2%, hey, guys, you got to give up something.
Now, Congress has a lot on its plate, and we now know that the Republicans in Congress and your House have decided that the number one issue that we have to deal with before we take any break for July 4th or whatever is to have a vote on holding Eric Holder in contempt of Congress.
Well,
right?
and what they decided.
This is the biggest priority for the House?
The biggest priority for the House. No, not passing a transportation authorization that would put millions of people back to work. Not making sure that women are paid equally for the same amount of work and the same education as men. Not ensuring that we protect programs like school nutrition and that we get teachers back to work and firefighters and law enforcement officers. Oh no. Let's hold Eric Holder in contempt. I mean, it really is ridiculous. I mean, we're not even spending any time in Washington anyway. I mean, people can check. Their members of Congress are at home doing whatever it is that they're doing, but they're not in Washington doing the people's business. And instead, we're going to come back and hold Eric Holder in contempt when we've got all of these pressing issues in front of us.
This reminds me so much of the impeachment of Bill Clinton, right?
Well, and it backfired, and this is going to backfire too, because the American people realize that, we have important work ahead of us, and that's about creating jobs and getting this economy going the way it needs to, and not the silliness that's going on there.
Congresswoman Donna Edwards will continue here on the Full Court Press.
This is the Bill Press Show. Heard around the country and seen on current TV. This is the Bill Press Show.
Hey, it's 33 minutes after the hour now here on the Full Court Press. This Thursday, June 14, it is the Full Court Press, and we're brought to you today by AFSCME, the good men and women of AFSCME, the largest public employee and healthcare workers union in the entire country, under President Jerry McAtee. For more information about their good work, go to their website, afscme.org, AFSCME.org, leading the fight on behalf of our beleaguered public service workers across the country. Congresswoman Donna Edwards in studio with us, and Liz Winstead will be joining us in the next segment. She's got a great new book out, a fun new book out called Liz, Free or Die. Congresswoman, it is true. There is having declared war on students, war on women, the Republicans now have declared war on public employees. It's pretty clear.
Well, they have. I mean, Mitt Romney said it pretty loudly and clearly. Forget the teachers and the firefighters and law enforcement officers.
Americans want to fire more of them.
Right.
Said.
And look around the country. And, we have teachers that were laid off over the course of the summer. We need to make sure that they're brought back into our classrooms at a time when we've got to get our students where they need to be to compete globally. And Mitt Romney has said, forget the future and forget public safety.
In terms of war on students, where are we now? We're getting closer and closer to July 1, when the rate on student loans will double. Is it going to happen?
Well, I tell you, it doesn't seem like we're, moving forward yet. And students across this country should be very concerned because, one, they're borrowing more because, college tuition costs have really skyrocketed. And also, their parents can't afford as much as they did before because, you might have taken out a home equity loan to help pay tuition and stuff. And we just don't have those resources available. And student loan rates are set to double from 3.4% to 6.8% on July 1st. And Republicans have said, you know what, the only way that we will protect those loan rates from doubling is if we cut school nutrition and we cut women's preventive health care. I mean, really. These guys, sort of every time it comes to protecting the interest of middle-income Americans, of working people, they go the opposite direction.
I was in Chicago last weekend, a book signing with the Obama Hate Machine, and a woman came up to me and said, she was struggling, still burdened by student loans. She said, I could have bought a house, except I'm paying $1,000 a month, interest only on our student loans.
Well, I know that when I came out of school, I had about $100,000 in student loans. $25,000 of that actually was going to the cottage industry that we got rid of.
Oh, right.
And that the Republicans want to bring, the middleman that the Republicans want to bring back.
Yeah.
And I paid off my very last student loan payment was almost a month to the day before I was elected to Congress.
No kidding. Wow.
No kidding. I mean, it was in the entirety of my, adulthood.
I don't understand why this is a partisan issue.
Well, it shouldn't be because student loans don't come in D's and R's.
Yeah, right. I also don't understand why. Here's one. Figure it out. Equal pay for equal work for women as well as men is a partisan issue.
Well,
but it is.
It should be a family issue because many women work outside the home now, and so what that means when a woman is paid only 77 cents on the dollar for the same work and the same experience is that a family it doesn't make 25% of the income that they could and should make if we had fair pay laws. And the Equal Pay Act hasn't been updated in 49 years. That's almost my entire lifetime, and look, in Congress, men and women, members of Congress, we make the same. Mm-hmm. That should be the same thing for the American people.
One would think, right? Congresswoman Donna Edwards in studio with us here on the Full Court Press. Your call is welcome at 866-55-PRESS. Congresswoman, there was a big special election this week, Tuesday, in Arizona. Sadly, to fill the seat of Gabby Giffords, who won't be in Congress any longer. But she had endorsed her former chief of staff, Ron Barber, and that's not necessarily a safe Democratic district.
Well, it's not, and in fact, it's really up in the air. But Ron Barber out in Arizona won that seat decisively with 52% of the vote. And, people have said, you can't use the Wisconsin result to show a national trend. Well, you can use the result in Arizona to be a bellwether because Ron Barber ran on protecting Social Security and the Medicare guarantee. He ran pointedly against it. Those were his issues. Yeah. And voters in Arizona said, yep, we're with you. We know that you're going to protect that guarantee for us. And I think that that's a good sign for Democrats going forward into the fall.
And particularly he was up against a Tea Party Republican.
Yes, he was. And very heavily, Jesse Kelly, heavily backed by the Tea Party, by outside spending groups. And Ron Barber overcame that. And in a good way, the district actually gets better, improves for the general election for Democrats. And so we're going to keep that. We're going to hold on to that seat that he's now won. And we're going to go all across the country. And we got to get 25 seats as Democrats to give that gavel back to Nancy Pelosi. We can do it.
I was going to say, you feel confident about that? I mean, you feel hopeful, I should say.
I do, and I think it's going to require a lot of hard work, district by district. These are not going to be national elections. They're going to be district by district. We are running at least 75 candidates strongly in districts all across this country, and I think that we can at least get 25.
You need 25. And Steve Israel's been in studio here with us, the head of the DCCC. I think is doing a great job. I mean, he's got it all worked out. He knows which districts and which candidates fit those districts. He was telling us the last time there's something like maybe 25, maybe more. You probably know the exact number of these Tea Party districts which Barack Obama carried.
Right, and an additional dozen or so that Obama and Kerry carried. And so we know that we have strength in these districts out there. I'm co-chairing our Red to Blue program to get the Congress back. And so, and been working, our chairman he's working, double time and overtime along with Leader Pelosi, making sure that our candidates have the resources that they need because there's going to be a lot of outside undisclosed money because of Citizens United. But we can do this.
President Obama is in Ohio today. We'll be going to Ohio today to give a major speech on the economy. Again, talking about the fact that things are getting better, but not fast enough. And he's got some ideas in front of Congress, particularly jobs bills that if the Republicans pass, we could be doing a hell of a lot better. But Mitt Romney yesterday saying whatever is happening, Obama gets zero credit for any of it. Here's Romney.
He is not responsible for whatever improvement we might be seeing. Instead, he's responsible for the fact that it's taken so long to see this recovery. And the recovery's so tepid.
All right. So no credit for the good stuff, but all the blame for the bad stuff.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, listening to that, to that statement, it really is amazing. I mean, look at where the president started, losing 750,000 jobs in the month that he took office. And we've had, even though, the president acknowledges that we need to do more, we've had steady job growth in the private sector for the last 27 months. Now, the president acknowledges, and certainly we do as Democrats, that it's not good enough. But you know what? Republicans actually hold the key to that because they're sitting on the major thing that could create millions of jobs, and that is a transportation authorization, rebuilding our roads and our bridges and all of our infrastructure, really creating jobs all throughout every sector. I mean, $1 billion would create 35,000 new jobs, and the Republicans are sitting on it. And so if anybody is responsible for us not making the kind of progress that we need to, it's definitely not the president, and it's definitely Republicans in Congress.
All right. Congresswoman Donna Edwards here with us here on the Full Court Press.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Greenberger, Robert Shiller, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.